Greetings to you, traveler. I am the modern druid, and we'll develop here some proposals about the last chapter. In the previous video, we introduced the idea of the H-stir for hypomnesic systems of transindividuation of reference. We'll make some developments around this concept because we believe the H-stir have evolved throughout history, and that this evolution could be of interest to us, particularly today, as we grapple with the digitalization of society. Now, let's see how the hypomnesic systems evolved in the past times. One would be tempted to begin this history of the H-stir with writing. But the works of Carol Fritz and Jean-Loïc Lequelec show quite precisely that rock paintings and engravings were graphic elements that structured hunter-gatherer clans, and that they are associated with techniques of oral transmission of myths. Without knowing the precise content of these myths, their existence make us think there were systems of transindividuation based on images and orality, graphic and oral hypomnesic techniques, and that they are associated with techniques of oral transmission of myths. With such a relatively simple graphic and oral system, we can assume that all individuals in the group participated, directly or indirectly, in transindividuation and could read images, listen to and tell stories, and produce traces. These hunter-gatherer clans may have been violent, patriarchal, or matriarchal. However, they were certainly more egalitarian than the societies that succeeded them. Anyway, it is interesting to us to consider that, at least between 40,000 and 3,000 years BC, but certainly even earlier, humanity relied on images and sounds to ensure its transindividuation. We therefore consider here that parietal and graphic arts, associated with oral tales, to be the first H-stir, hypomnesic system of reference, as we say, in human history. This should also make us question the concept of prehistory. Later on, with the progress of agriculture, inventory and livestock accounting systems emerged. Counting systems later became writing systems, Sumerian, Elamite, and hieroglyphics for instance. It appears that these hypomnesic systems were more precise, but much more complicated, even encrypted, than the preceding audio and graphic systems, and that the first writing systems were reserved for the use of an elite, scribes, priests, and kings. We read, moreover, in Levi-Strauss's Tristes Tropiques regarding writing. It seems to favor the exploitation of men before their enlightenment. If my hypothesis is correct, it must be admitted that the primary function of written communication is to facilitate enslavement. The use of writing for disinterested purposes, with a view to deriving intellectual and aesthetic satisfaction, is a secondary result, if not often reduced to a means to reinforce, justify, or conceal the other. If writing fails to consolidate knowledge, it is at least essential to strengthening domination. End of quote. This is why we will consider the earliest forms of writing as closed or elitist systems, or, as has been said, systems of proletarianization. That is to say, the widespread adoption of writing may have involved the confiscation and destruction of previous oral and graphic transindividuation circuits, and may have been seen as a loss of knowledge and participation for populations. This can inform our reflection on challenging the concept of prehistory. However, later on again, we then see the development of simplified writing systems, hieratic and alphabetic. With these systems, we note that the number of individuals with access to hypomnesic practices increased. We believe that writing is no longer reserved for scribes, priests, and kings, as in previous elitist or encrypted systems, but that these simplified writing were also open to warriors, and that they have thus become nobles. If this were not completely anachronistic, we could speak of a process of bourgeoisification, as we have understood it. That is to say, with alphabetic writing, individuals of a lower class, the warriors, were able to access a cultural practice of a higher class, the priests. It would then seem that the sharing of handwriting h-stir among a larger number of people is also linked to the sharing of power. With handwritten alphabetic writing, Athenian democracy and feudal systems developed. We hypothesize here that with the technical evolution of simplified handwritten scripts, and particularly alphabetic writing, came political and social developments in the sharing of power. Even later, we then note a new socio-technical change with the invention of the printing press, and we estimated that, after the h-stir of handwritten writing, it would be that of printed writing. With the print and spread of books, the proportion of individuals with access to reading and writing increased further, allowing more people to participate in the h-stir and in decision-making bodies. And then the bourgeoisie was able to compete in knowledge with the nobility until the revolutions of the 18th century and the establishment of bourgeois representative democracies in Europe. With the printed book, we had a true phenomenon of bourgeoisification. That is to say, thanks to the printing press, the wealthiest commoners, the merchants, were able to access cultural practices that were reserved for the nobility, when writing was still only handwritten. Today, we think that we would still be in a system based on the distribution of printed books. In any case, government institutions are the ones that have adapted to this system, and we are still governed by the bourgeois class that dominates this system. A system based on reading and writing printed texts. The school and university systems were produced in this h-stir and are still completely dependent on it. In parentheses, we note that according to Michel Foucault, the main purpose of school systems is to maintain social order by selecting a cohort of individuals who will be able to occupy leadership positions and maintain bourgeois control over the rest of society. Close parenthesis. We will consider here that analog technologies, films, radio and television, were only a parenthesis in socio-technical evolution. That is to say that, the technologies of audiovisual recording and broadcasting could constitute a form of moment of disruption of the circuits of transindividuation based on writing. We could speak with ars industrialis of symbolic misery and generalized proletarianization, with television and radio. But we perhaps realize now that this was only a transition, an epiphenomenon, which was caught up by the digitalization of society. The analog would not have had time to constitute a h-stir in its own right. On the other hand, today, we believe that the system of transindividuation based on the printed book is in fierce competition with the system based on the digitization of hypomnesis. More than competition, it is perhaps a replacement of h-stir that we are witnessing with the digitization of society. It is a historical event. Stiegler spoke of an epochal redoubling. We'll come back to this later. This h-stir replacement led us to sociopolitical friction, and the Yellow Vest movement was perhaps the first event in a terrible conflict between the bourgeoisie, who have power, thanks to the written word, and who want to keep it, and the others, who feel entitled to also take part in decisions, as they participate in the new circuits of transindividuation, which have been digitized and which remain written, but which are also, and perhaps above all, oral and graphic. That is to say, that if the digitalization of society consisted of the imposition of a new system of transindividuation of reference, and if indeed all individuals who participate in this system are entitled to share power, then, according to this theory, a revolution should take place. We don't know when or how. leading to a broader sharing of power among the population. A broader sharing of power, linked to the broader sharing of hypomnies. In other words, if digital technology indeed produces a widespread bourgeoisization of the entire population, by providing access to bourgeois cultural practices, this should lead us, paradoxically, to the end of the bourgeoisie as the ruling class and the advent of a system of direct democracy. Once again, we don't know when, we don't know how. But according to this theory, we are moving toward a big revolution. We will see other consequences of this theory of the H-stir in the next episode.